hello and welcome to this CNBC Africa special. Now, Gauteng has once again improved the number of clean audits in the province. And joining me to discuss this, as well as the province's plans for infrastructure development, is Gauteng Premier David Makhura. Premier, thanks for your time. So once again, the Gauteng province has made improvements in its clean audits. Tell us exactly who are driving these improvements.
I am very glad to say that since 2014, we have improved audit outcomes from 56% of clean audits, which means 100% the concurrence of the Auditor General that we're running our finances well. We have improved that from 56% to 65% of the clean audits. In addition to the clean audits, which is really the top of the league in financial management, we have eliminated in the provincial government departments and entities any disclaimers or qualified audit outcomes. So we have only two categories now. Is all departments and entities have unqualified reports. Unqualified reports means, yes, you're doing quite well in the use of financial resources that you are the custodian of. But in some areas of these unqualified reports, there may be issues that the Auditor General says, please attend to this. For example, there's still areas of irregular expenditure, deal with that. There's still areas of lack of compliance. So we have the largest, now 2/3 of our departments and entities are in the league of clean audits. 2/3 of them means the Auditor General is happy that we're doing things the right way. We're using the money for what it is supposed to be used for, and we can account for every cent that we do. But even with the 2/3, there's still this 1/3 of the departments where there are still issues that I am working with all the MECs to deal with.
And what are those issues, and how will you hold that 1/3 to account?
There's still a deep concern for me that there's still irregular expenditure which arises largely from the officials of government not following the proper procurement procedures. So when decisions are made, for example, on appointing service providers, and in some instances you've got areas where things are just not done in line with the compliance or the regulations. So that's where the 1/3 is, and in this term of our administration, the 5th administration of this ANC-led provincial government, we have been improving, eliminating these areas of non-compliance. And I have set a target. We are at 65% now. Next year, I would like us to be at 75%. And we have identified departments that have got, some are big departments that have got major challenges, such as the Department of Health. But we are holding both the MECs and the accounting officers, the heads of departments and their teams accountable. So myself and the MEC for Finance, MEC Barbara Chrissy, as we have been doing since 2014, every time the results, the audit outcomes or the audit results are released, we sit down. I call all the MECs of the affected departments with their heads of departments for them to first account. Why do we still have lack of compliance? Why do we still have irregular expenditure? Why do we have, in some instances, wasteful expenditure? Why are officials in your department doing this, and what are you going to do? What is called consequence management.
And Premier, tell us, how has the open tender process helped you in improving the percentage of clean audits that the Gauteng province is currently sitting with now?
I think the open tender process has been critical. It's been one of the key catalysts of innovation we introduced in 2014, when I became the Premier of our province. One of the critical issues, I looked at all data, and that data pointed to one thing, that the level of concern about corruption is increasing every year. And that we mustn't just talk about corruption, we must make it difficult for officials to be corrupt. So we need to introduce innovations in our system of government where we don't only catch the officials when they have stolen the money. We must make it very difficult for public office bearers like ourselves and officials to actually steal the money. By the time you catch them and they've stolen the money, it's often too late. So we said, let's introduce a different way of awarding or tenders or procuring goods and services. That different way must be transparent, it must be open, it must make it very difficult for things that we often hear that officials are offered bribes to happen. And the open tender system, which was introduced, piloted in the first year in 2 departments, in transport and treasury, has now been moved to all departments in Gauteng and the entities, and any amount that is about 5 million goes through the open tender system. It has contributed tremendously to these improvements.
We have been a sort of a junk economy now for around 6 months. That's when we were downgraded in April. I'm wondering, how has the credit downgrades and the slowing of the economy impacted on your job?
Well, I think there's no doubt, Fifi, that the current economic conditions in our country, but also in the different regions of the global economy, are felt everywhere. They are felt by citizens. Even in our country, the downgrade is not something we can play around and downplay and try to be clever about it. When the value of the rand is eroded, it's not something we can play around. Those things have a direct bearing on our citizens. They have a direct bearing on businesses. They have a direct bearing on jobs. They have a direct bearing on prices and all that. So they have a direct bearing on the real economy. They have a direct bearing on governance. I am glad that so far, from a budget point of view, I think we're not in a situation where budgets have been cut because of the downgrade. But we know that somewhere down the line, if the economic situation doesn't improve, there will be also consequences for budgets somewhere down the line. That's why we have to do everything, work with our national government, work with the national economic team, the Minister of Finance, the team at the DTI and economic development, and all those. We work with them as a province to address all these issues of raising the level of public confidence as well as investor confidence, so that our economy can come back.
The business people that we interact with on the show on a daily basis, I mean, the major thing that always comes up is the political uncertainty that is affecting their confidence to do more, not only in Gauteng but also the country. Now, there's a lot of headlines regarding political tensions at the top within the ruling party, especially since that secret ballot vote against the President Jacob Zuma. I'd like to know, has this filtered down to the provincial level? Are you finding that it's impacted the Gauteng province, the political tensions?
Well, I can say that I think probably our country will need to get used to the fact that every 5 years there will be elections, national elections, to elect new leaders, firstly in the country, and every 5 years there'll be changes in leadership. There'll also be changes in municipal leadership, but even the parties do that. And in our case, as a governing party, we also, every 5 years, it doesn't happen exactly at the time of general elections. Every 5 years, we also have a national conference to elect leadership, because the ANC is the governing party in South Africa, yes. The elections in the ANC are of great interest. I understand that perfectly, to everybody, to every sector, because the question about what next? The policies of the ANC themselves are of great interest to the country, because everybody works on the basis of what policy positions are we going to have, and will this harm business or it will not? Will this impact on improving the well-being and including more South Africans in the economy, or it may even have an adverse effect? Will it be able to open more opportunities? So that issue of the leadership, particularly of the ANC as the governing party, as a concern and as something that has a bearing on what is called political uncertainty. Uncertainty, I understand, but I want to say that we will need to get used to that cycle. And I am very confident, Fifi, that firstly at the provincial level, I think we are running the affairs of both the party and government in the way we have always done, and that's why I'm glad that we are even driving in government. The focus must be on delivery. In the next 18 months, the provincial government must do what we have done in the first 2.5 years. We want to drive the outcomes we want in every area where we have set goals for this term. We don't want anything to impact on that. Even the current economic climate must not sidetrack us from focusing on delivering on the goals we have set ourselves. Even the processes of an ANC national conference must not sidetrack us on that. So, but I am confident, I am an optimist that we will emerge out of the December conference of the ANC with a more unified organization, even from a point of view of policy, a much clearer, coherent policy that helps to direct every sector of the economy.
The migration issue, is this a problem for the Gauteng province's ability to deliver on service delivery, especially within such a tight budget?
Well, I think firstly, if we should treat migration as an aspect of urbanization. So urbanization and rapid urbanization is one of the dominant forces of the 21st century. Every part of the world which is less urbanized is going to increase greater movement of people from the countryside, from the rural areas to the cities. That's the reality, and the United Nations has worked out that in fact Asia and Africa are going to be the continents that will experience the greatest momentum with regard to this urbanization in the 21st century. So the reality of urbanization is something we must live with. You can't stop urbanization. People are going to continue to move largely to cities. So what does that mean for a province like ours? Yes, we have huge movement of people. Every year we have, every 5 years we have about 1.2 million people who move into Gauteng province. Every 5 years.
It's a lot of people.
And that's very, very significant for a province like ours that that has implications for governance. It has implications for service delivery. It has implications for education. Every year we deal with large number of young people, of learners who were not in the system in our province, who are knocking at our schools. Parents are saying, this is my child, can you provide an opportunity or a place for them? Our hospitals and clinics, health system is clogged with the large numbers of migrants who are coming from the different parts of our country for one reason and one reason only. Most of them is for economic opportunities. Housing delivery is also impacted by that. We have delivered 1.2 million houses over since 1994. That's the largest number. That's the largest number that any province has been able to do. But the backlog is huge, up to 600 million people. So the long and short of it is that migration and rapid urbanization impact severely on our ability to provide services. But there is the other side is that it also brings, it's a very positive force. It brings the most innovative, most entrepreneurial people, most skilled people from the different parts of our country and even continent, and entrepreneurs. A lot of people who are moving into our economy here are people who really want to have a go at opportunities. So most of them are looking and trying to put something for themselves, to do things for themselves. So it also brings innovation. Right. So it's not, we shouldn't look at it only from a yes, it puts pressure. From a point of view of governance, someone like myself as the premier of this most populous province, we experience lots of pressure. That's you see the rate of service delivery protests is not because nothing is happening. The more you do it, the more you build houses, the more people demand services. Right. When they see progress elsewhere, they would want to see progress in areas where they are, and that progress is not coming. So yes, it's that type of pressure, but it is also very positive.
Okay.
I would like us to harness the positive force of this migration so we can unleash the opportunities in the economy.
Now the province is looking to extend the Gauteng services to reach more areas. Yes. But in the headlines this week, we had Marion Roberts coming out to say that they had increased their stake in that Gauteng company. But now the transport minister is saying, no, they don't know anything about this deal. Is that standoff between Marion Roberts right now and the transport department potentially, will it hamper on the Gauteng province's plans to extend the Gauteng rail route?
Well, I just want to start by saying that I think to deal with the Gauteng issues, to also just build on this point that public transport is also one area of infrastructure where there's huge pressure arising from these big numbers. We now have close to 14 million people in Gauteng. So we need a very efficient public transport system, because an inefficient public transport system impacts also on the economy. People take too long to get anywhere. Goods take too long to get anywhere. So then it hampers economic development, it hampers growth in that sense. So you need an efficient public system. And we have been investing together with our cities in rolling out the BRT system. In our case, the Gauteng is one of the best success stories. That's why we are expanding it. I made announcements in February that we want the routes of the Gauteng to be expanded to different areas of our province, including in the townships. But we also want to integrate it with metro rail system, the metro rail, that system that is being modernized now. So we're integrating the buses, we're integrating the Gauteng, we're integrating with the metro rail. We're also having very good discussions with the taxi industry to integrate the taxi industry also into the system, so that we can have an efficient public system. So back to the Gauteng story. The reason we must continue to invest, especially the rail, is often the most effective way of moving large numbers of people. So we have built the Gauteng. So firstly, the Gauteng is owned fully by the Gauteng provincial government. There's no private ownership in there. But we did a concession. That's when, at the time it was built, the building of the Gauteng was on the model of a concession, which is private sector people, a consortium that came together, that is the one that built that. So in that private entity, who owns how much, including Marion Roberts, it's where the discussions took place. So if Marion Roberts has decided, for example, that they want to increase their stake and they are buying out certain people, even with that private, and they still have to come to the Gauteng provincial government, because they are just a concession. And then we are, so they can't own anything about the Gauteng, but that entity, that private entity that's was involved in building, they'll still have to come to us in accordance with the agreements, that for them to say, look, there's been changes in the ownership here, this one has done that. So they haven't yet done. We have seen the announcement in public, but they haven't yet done that. The MEC for Transport in our province has made it clear that they should, normally they should have, or they are still going to approach the Gauteng Management Agency, which is our agency running the Gauteng. And by the time that whole process is concluded, the provincial government will have a view. So we are not excited about it. But I don't want people to confuse what the 50% is about with. It's not about owning the Gauteng. Right. The Gauteng is our entity 100%.
100%. You were recently in attendance at the infrastructure summit that took place in Johannesburg, in fact around the corner in Sandton here this week. And one of the issues that has come up is, you know, how infrastructure development is not quite at the levels that it should be to prop up the economies, but particularly to connect cities, African cities. Yes. What is your view on the level of infrastructure development right now?
Yes, Fifi, I attended this week the Infrastructure Africa conference that was held here, correctly as you said. And that conference was preceded by our Gauteng Infrastructure Investment Conference in July. The Infrastructure Investment Conference of our province in July also had a significant participation by business and political, particularly regional leaders. Regional, I mean in the different parts of the continent, I mean in the subnational sense. Representatives of different regional governments, subnational governments in regions and cities in our continent. And the discussions at the Infrastructure Africa conference was a follow-up, and a lot of the issues that we were discussing there is really the issues that are on the AU agenda 2063. It is clear that to move Africa forward, to industrialize our continent, to integrate the African economies, we need to use infrastructure as a catalyst for industrialization and economic integration. We know that the backlog, or the infrastructure backlog in our continent ranges between 90 and 100 billion US dollars. We've got to ensure that every country in our continent, and I must add every country, but every regional government, whether it's states or provinces, and every city or local government must be focused on the infrastructure issues. If we want to get Africa to grow in a sustainable way, in an inclusive way, in a way that brings a very dynamic element, new element in the African economy, so that we move away from extractive economies to economies that can also produce their own food to feed our people. We can also produce the goods that we need for our homes, the clothes we wear. We need to invest in significant social and in economic infrastructure. The conversation at this week's summit was important, and the point I made there was that the cities and the provinces and the states, which are subnational governments in the African continent, must not take a back seat. This idea that these problems must only be solved by national governments in those forums of the AU, we are not taking our responsibilities very seriously. As the mayors, as the governors, as the premiers, in the different governments, subnational governments in our continent, we have to look at the budgets we have, the resources we have. Are we putting enough money in infrastructure? Because infrastructure is the key driver of economic development. And that's why I think I'm very glad, as we talk even about the audits, I'm very glad that we also need to put pressure not only on national governments, but also on city governments and these states and provincial governments to use their resources well and build the state-of-the-art infrastructure. We must invest in public transport, as I was saying. Good public transport systems are required across the continent. The cities in our continent, these urban centers, are a nightmare from a public transport point of view. To travel in any of the major African cities is a big problem. We need to unlock this gridlock by investing, but also in broadband. Africa can't be left behind. If we want to be at the right there in the fourth industrial revolution, we have to invest in ICT infrastructure. And there are exciting things that are happening here at home in our cities, broadband investments, free Wi-Fi. In some parts of our continent, in Nairobi, exciting things are there in Lagos, in Accra. So investing also in other areas of infrastructure, including industrial infrastructure, is crucial. Water and sanitation, the utilities have to be reliable. So the discussions, these discussions are so important. So there's, who is at the center of this? It's the cities and the regional governments they are the ones much closer to the people. So our point is that we shouldn't have conversations on African integration, industrialization, and infrastructure development that leaves the city governments and the regional governments and provincial governments out, because the more we think that that's the responsibility of national governments, we get away with murder. For example, the issue I was raising, when there's underspending on infrastructure, like I've raised a concern with our metro governments here in Gauteng, when you allow the conversation to focus only on national governments, you allow us to get away with murder. If we are underspending, when we have budgets, big budgets, when we have 3 billion rands that gets returned because it's not spent, we undermining development. And no, infrastructure investment also does very important things. Every rand, we have done a study that shows every rand we have invested on infrastructure in Gauteng, it has catalyzed additional 92 cents of economic activity, create more jobs. It leads to the creation of more businesses. In that sense, it also leads to money getting into the pockets of citizens as well, households. So we've got to spend, but we also have to put pressure that there's good governance. Infrastructure is also an area where the potential for corruption can be huge. You know, here at home we talk of state capture, for example. So we need good governance, we need clean governance. So together with the need to invest resources in infrastructure, the need to build good infrastructure, we also have to bring in private sector participation, but we must also ensure these infrastructure budgets are not sites of corruption and state capture.
And I suppose that is where the open tender process will come in. Yes. But Premier, we are going to have to leave it there. Thanks for your time as always. That was Gauteng Premier David Makhura.